Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today we're tackling physical education strategies.
Hmm.
And to do that, we're looking at this book, Didáctica de la educación física.
Okay.
It's in Spanish, but
Sounds interesting.
yeah, it's really fascinating. It covers everything like lesson planning to teaching strategies to how to communicate in the classroom and even inclusivity for students with disabilities.
Wow, it's quite a range.
It is. I think there are going to be some really valuable insights here, no matter if you're a teacher yourself or a coach or just someone who likes to think about physical activity.
I'm excited to dig in.
Me too. So let's just dive right in. One of the first things that jumped out at me was this big emphasis on planning for PE.
Hmm.
The book argues that good organization is really like the foundation for good teaching in PE.
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just wing it and expect to get good results.
Yeah, exactly. But it goes a bit deeper than just like having a schedule or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, the authors stress this idea of contextualization, which is basically making sure what you teach connects to real-world applications.
So, why bother drilling basketball dribbling if students never connect that to an actual game situation?
Exactly. It's all about bridging the gap between what happens in the gym and how those skills actually get used.
Makes sense.
What I found really interesting, too, is they take it a step further.
Oh. How so?
It talks about adapting objectives based on learning levels.
Okay.
Like they use this example of layups in basketball.
Uh-huh.
Mastering a layup in a 3-on-3 game is going to be different than in a 5-on-5 game tactically, right?
Right. Different spacing, different defender.
Exactly. So even within one skill, there's like all these layers of complexity depending on the context.
I like that.
Me too. And this actually helps with both teaching and assessing because it makes success way more clear.
Yeah, no more vague goals.
Everyone knows what they're working towards. Now, speaking of clear communication,
Oh, yeah.
the book had this whole chapter dedicated to it, which I found really interesting.
Hmm.
It's not just about yelling, run faster,
Right, right.
There are all these nuances.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Well, one thing they pointed out that really resonated with me is how much nonverbal communication matters, too.
Oh, interesting.
Like, you can say all the encouraging words you want, but if your body language is totally different, students are going to pick up on that.
Oh, absolutely. It's like when someone says, I'm fine, but their tone and face are saying, leave me alone.
Yeah. We're all subconsciously reading those cues all the time.
Right, right.
And get this. The book actually analyzed how PE teachers give instructions.
Like literally record them or something.
Yeah. And they found this crazy statistic.
How is it?
Most presentations of a task didn't even state the objective.
Well, hold on. So the students are just doing stuff without knowing why.
Apparently a lot of the time, yeah. Makes you think, right.
It really does. I mean, clear communication matters everywhere, not just in PE.
I totally agree. And they talk about the types of feedback, too. Not just right or wrong, but how you did it and when that feedback comes is important.
Timing is everything.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about engagement.
Well,
The next section of the book is all about engaging teaching strategies.
love it.
And they use this phrase, the ecological paradigm, which honestly I was a little confused by at first.
Yeah, that sounds a bit jargony.
It does, right? But basically it means creating a PE class that actually feels like a real sports community with teamwork, communication, all that good stuff.
Mirroring real-world settings.
Exactly. So instead of teaching isolated skills, you're building this environment where students get to experience the real-world applications of what they're learning.
No, that makes sense.
I thought so too once I wrapped my head around it. And under this ecological paradigm, they talk about all sorts of specific strategies. Things like autonomy-focused learning, where students might even have like self-directed learning contracts.
Wow.
Peer teaching, where they're observing and analyzing each other's technique. And of course, cooperative learning, which is all about collaboration towards a shared goal.
So it's not one size fits all. There's a whole range of approaches.
There is. It's like a toolbox you can choose from based on the situation.
I like that analogy.
I'm curious, though.
Yeah.
What do you find particularly effective about peer teaching?
Oh, man. Peer teaching is great because it makes students engage differently. When they have to teach this skill, it's not just about doing it themselves anymore.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, they have to really understand it to break it down and explain it clearly.
So it forces them to think about it more deeply.
Exactly. And studies show it actually improves how well they learn the skill, too.
No way.
Yeah. Plus, it builds confidence and communication skills.
Whoa, that's a lot of benefits.
Yeah, it's a win-win for sure.
I love that. Now, as we move on to the next topic, I want everyone listening to think about this.
Okay.
Which of these strategies resonates most with you? Like, how do you personally learn best?
Good question.
Do you thrive on independence, or do you need that collaboration and feedback?
It's interesting to think about how different teaching styles can really click with certain people.
It is, and great teachers are able to adjust and adapt their approach to fit everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next thing the book tackles is classroom climate.
Okay.
And they paint these two contrasting pictures.
Oh.
One classroom is chaotic, disorganized, instructions are all over the place.
Oh, God.
And the other is supportive, structured, everyone knows what's expected.
Okay, much better.
And this leads into a discussion about what factors actually create that climate.
Hmm.
And the book breaks it down into three main areas: clear rules and consequences, empathetic communication, and then motivation.
Okay, so not just having rules, but having clear consequences when they're broken.
Right. Why do you think that's so important?
I think it comes down to structure and accountability. Students need to know what happens if they don't meet expectations.
Yeah, it creates a sense of fairness, too.
Exactly.
And it can really change the whole feel of the classroom.
Absolutely.
Now, I know we don't have time to cover every single detail,
Right.
but if you had to pick one actionable tip from this section that listeners can implement right away, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There are so many good ones.
I know, right?
Okay, I think one of the simplest but most effective strategies is this. On day one, ask your students what they expect from PE class.
Oh, I like that.
It sets the tone for collaboration right from the start.
Yeah, it shows them their voices matter.
Exactly.
And it gives you valuable information about what they're hoping to get out of the class.
You can tailor your approach based on what they tell you.
Such a good point. Well, folks, that wraps up part one of our deep dive into Didáctica de la educación física.
Wow, we've covered a lot already.
We have, and there's more to come. We'll be back soon with part two, where we'll be exploring the crucial topic of inclusion and adapted practices.
Can't wait.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone.
All right, so we spent part one talking about some really important groundwork for teaching PE, planning, engagement, communication.
Right, setting the stage.
Exactly.
Right.
But now we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about something super crucial: inclusion. And specifically, how to adapt practices to include students with disabilities.
It's so important.
It is. And this book we're exploring, Didáctica de la educación física, really emphasizes this idea of inclusive tasks.
Inclusive
Yes.
tasks.
So basically, these are activities that can be adapted to work for a wide range of abilities.
Okay, I'm listening.
Instead of separating students with disabilities into modified activities, the authors argue we should try to create an environment where everyone can participate together as much as possible.
That's a really interesting concept. But how does that work in practice? I mean, aren't there times when you do need to modify things so a student can fully participate?
You're totally right. It's not about forcing a one-size-fits-all approach. The book actually stresses that true inclusion requires flexibility and really understanding each student's individual needs.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Sometimes modifications are necessary, but they should be done thoughtfully,
To avoid isolating students.
Exactly. To maximize participation without making anyone feel singled out.
I see.
So I'm curious, what are some of the specific adaptation strategies that stood out to you from the book?
Oh, there were so many good ones.
Okay.
Okay, so one that really stuck with me was using a student with a visual impairment as the model for a skill demonstration.
Whoa, that's really cool.
Right, it kind of flips the script in a really positive way.
Yeah, it empowers that student, and it also helps their classmates understand and appreciate different ways of learning.
Exactly. It normalizes those differences.
I love that.
Another one that was super simple but brilliant was using tactile floor markings for a game like Capture the Flag.
Oh, that's clever.
Right. So students with visual impairments can navigate the playing field without needing any extra help.
Such a simple tweak, but it makes a huge difference.
Totally. And then they also talked about some adaptive sports that I hadn't heard of before.
Oh, like what?
Have you ever heard of boccia?
Boccia. Nope. Rings a bell, but I don't know what it is.
It's a target sport where players propel balls towards a target ball.
Okay.
And it can be adapted for people with all sorts of physical disabilities.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then there's goal ball.
Goal ball. Okay.
That one's specifically for athletes with visual impairments.
How does that work?
They play on a court with tactile markings, and the ball has bells inside so they can track its movement.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
It's amazing to see how these sports create opportunities for everyone to compete and have fun.
I know. It really is inspiring.
But alongside all these positive examples, the book also talks about what not to do when it comes to inclusion.
Oh, like common mistakes people make.
Exactly.
What?
Well, one thing they caution against is simply lowering expectations for students with disabilities without actually assessing their capabilities.
Right. It's not about making things easier. It's about making them accessible.
Yes. And you can't assume that all students with the same disability need the same adaptations.
So true. Every individual is different.
Exactly. A personalized approach is key.
These are such important points for anyone working with students, especially in a PE setting.
Absolutely. We need to be mindful and create a truly inclusive environment where everyone feels supported.
And challenged.
Yes. And sometimes the best adaptations are the simplest you know,
Oh, like what?
like dimming the lights or providing noise-canceling headphones for a student who's sensitive to sensory overload.
Little things can make a huge difference.
Totally. It's all about paying attention and being flexible.
So true. Now, listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you had any experience adapting activities or creating inclusive environments?
We might even feature your stories in a future episode.
We'd love to hear your insights.
Absolutely.
Okay, so wrapping up this segment on inclusion, I think the big takeaway is that it's more than just good intentions. It takes real effort to understand the needs of each student and a willingness to adapt, and the belief that everyone can benefit from physical activity, no matter their abilities.
Well said.
And it's a journey,
Yeah.
We can always be learning and improving our inclusive practices.
Absolutely.
Okay, everyone, get ready for part 3. We'll wrap up this deep dive with some final thoughts and challenges inspired by all these amazing ideas.
Sounds good.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. It's really amazing how much we've uncovered just by exploring this one book, Didáctica de la educación física.
I know, right?
It really shows how much more there is to PE than just, like, the physical activities themselves.
Absolutely. It's about all these layers, the planning, the strategies, the communication, creating that positive environment.
Yeah, there's so much intentionality behind it.
And all of that leads to better learning, more engagement, and ultimately a more positive experience for everyone.
Exactly. So before we wrap up this deep dive completely, I wanted to leave our listeners with something to think about, something that kind of goes beyond what the book explicitly says.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So one thing that stuck with me was how the authors talked about technology.
They mentioned it as a supplement, not a replacement for actual physical activity.
Right. And that got me thinking, like, how do we find that balance as technology keeps advancing? It's a question we face not just in PE, but in education overall.
It is, because technology can be a fantastic tool, but it can't replicate everything.
Exactly. So where do we draw the line? What are the ethical considerations? It's not a simple issue.
Definitely not. And it's something we need to keep discussing, especially as technology becomes more and more integrated into our lives.
Totally. Here's another challenge for our listeners, and it comes from thinking about how the book focuses on formal education, schools and classrooms.
All right.
What I'd love for you to consider is how these insights can be applied beyond that setting.
Oh, interesting.
Because whether you're a coach, a trainer, even just a parent playing with your kids, so many of these principles can be adapted.
Yeah, it's about taking those core ideas, planning, communication, adapting to different needs, and applying them to any situation where you're helping someone learn and grow physically.
Exactly. It's about being intentional and thoughtful in how we approach physical activity, no matter the context.
Well said.
So there you have it, folks. That concludes our deep dive into Didáctica de la educación física.
I feel like we just scratched the surface. There's so much good stuff in there.
I know. It's a book that really makes you think. We hope you've gained some valuable knowledge and some inspiration to apply to your own work or even just your own personal fitness journey.
And remember, knowledge is most powerful when it's put into action.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds active and those bodies moving.